fact that when you live in a country with 27, 28 million people, having only two major parties is not good enough. Right now, what we know is what we've done for the last 50 years as a Muslim community has not worked for us. We blindly followed Labour, we've blindly voted Labour, and that hasn't worked out for us at the current stage. So do we give someone else a chance, or do we continue blindly voting Labour?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode of TBN. The other day we had our special guest from MVM, Muslim Votes Matter, and we had a podcast for about half an hour. We thought we'd bring him back because there's still some questions needed to be asked, and people's interests demanded that we brought him back, inshallah. So, Brother Ahmed, regarding MVM's effort to promote certain independent parties or independent people, how can we guarantee that doing this as an unintended consequence, you're going to bring in a Dutton government? And that would be unfavorable for the Muslims. If what we are seeing now is unfavorable for Gaza, then that is nothing in comparison to what we will see, people are saying, if there is a Dutton government.
Thank you, Sheikh, for bringing me back to your show. We have to start off with realizing that no one, including a lot of non-Muslims, want a Dutton-led liberal government in power. There has been liberal prime ministers and liberal periods of government where there have been stability in Australia, where there has been a due process in dealings with foreign policy, but the Dutton-led party is not one that anyone in our circle wants to see come into power. That is not our intention. Our intention is to highlight the fact that when you live in a country with 27, 28 million people, having only two major parties is not good enough. You know, if you take examples of a lot of the European countries where democracy is flourishing, you have multiple parties, sometimes 5, 6 parties, representing different constituents of the electorate. But in Australia, we're only given two choices, Labour or Liberal. And what's more strikingly worrying is that what you're seeing right now in Australia is two parties that are starting to make very similar, if not identical, policies on issues, both local and foreign. The Medicare is a perfect example. The AUKUS deal that started under the Scott Morrison prime ministership that then went on to Albanese, and Albanese had the choice to go out there and say, no, we do not want to be part of this deal. We want to take Australia out of it. But he didn't do that. He went there with Joe Biden back then and Rishi Sunak and signed us up to a $375 billion bill. Those are the things that you start to see, and you start to realize that actually there's not much difference between these two parties. So do you continue voting for those two parties, or do you give the independents a choice? No one wants a Dutton government, but there are better alternatives than Labour.
What guarantees can you give that these independent candidates will hold true to their words now? As we have seen politicians, by and large, they say one thing and they do other things. What guarantees do we have that these independents, who right now may be having favourable policies and saying that they will do such and such, how can we be assured that they will fulfill their end of the bargain?
Yeah. So Sheikh, the process of MVM and the way we work is that we are very strategic in our approach. We're not giving guarantees for anyone and anything. What guarantee did anyone give us when Labour wanted our votes that they would listen to us? The way we're working with this is you are lending your vote. The entire process of democracy is that you lend your vote, your individual vote or your collective vote. You're lending it to a candidate who is giving you promises. And if they can't deliver on those promises, alhamdulillah, you're not stuck for the rest of your life with them. You've only got to deal with them for 3 years. And at the 3 years, if they're not competent enough, or if they're not dealing with you enough, then there will be another candidate who will put their hand up and you can give them a go. But if they're competent enough and they're working with you, then you continue voting for them. That's how democracy works. Right now, what we know is what we've done for the last 50 years as a Muslim community has not worked for us. We blindly followed Labour, we've blindly voted Labour, and that hasn't worked out for us at the current stage. So do we give someone else a chance, or do we continue blindly voting Labour? Let's look at it from the most simplest example. The day after election, if 70% of Muslims continued voting for Labour the way that we have done in the past, what do you think they're going to do when they sit back in their boardrooms and talk about their election win? They're going to look back and say, hey, we enabled 45,000 Muslims to be killed by the genocidal regime, and yet they still voted for us. So really, we don't really have to do much. They'll continue voting for us. Or if they lose that election, or they become a minority government, they're going to sit back in that boardroom and say, hey, we lost this community. We lost because we didn't listen to them. So what are we going to do to win back their votes? That's the position we want to be in.
A lot of our community still needs convincing, and many of them don't understand thoroughly how the political process works, and a lot of them will just go in and give a donkey vote to avoid the fine. What can we do? Can we do more to educate our community? And many people, they will not research on their own. They will just follow a recommendation. They'll just blind follow. Should we have two sets of approaches? Like for some people that are not willing to research and go deep, they just trust, okay, there's people that have some expertise. Should we just follow these people?
For those who want to get educated about the government system and about the electoral system, we have a strategy. But we also recognize that there are people in our community who are not so savvy when it comes to the political space, who might be too busy with their daily lives to be dealing with the different electorates around Australia and how voting works and all of that stuff. So for them, we've actually come up with how to vote cards that we will be releasing closer to the election day. Basically, it will outline the preferences on how they should vote on all the 7 likely candidates that will put their hand up during that time. We can't issue those cards yet because the election hasn't been called, and so therefore not all the candidates that can be or should be registered are on the ballot yet. So once that happens, we will be able to release that, and we will circulate that through our social media, we'll circulate that through our community gatherings, and then people will know exactly how to go about it.
Yep, that's good. So those how to vote cards, will you be having booths on election day so that people that when they come to vote, Muslim voters will be able to obtain a how to vote card on the day? Will you have enough manpower to do that?
That's a good question, Sheikh. So basically, there's 151 seats across Australia, and we are targeting 11 seats where we have the Muslim community in those areas with a greater ratio than the margin that the candidates holding the seat. So in those seats, we will be having booths across each of the polling stations. So as an example, in the seat of Cowan, north of the river in WA, we will have about 45 polling stations where we will be present with volunteers distributing how to vote cards. There's already a candidate that has nominated themselves and put their hand up. We will be working with them closer to election. And once we are ready with our how to vote cards, we will be distributing that with their name as number 1.
Great. So that's what you're doing for federal elections, and you've made that point clear. We still believe that there is a need for guidance in state elections on Saturday. Can you shed some light on this, the state elections, WA?
Yeah. So even when we look at the state elections or the state government and the federal government, there is some work that happens in between them that affects us. So as an example, we know our number 1 concern is Gaza at a federal level, but even at a state level, the AUKUS deal that Australia's got itself into ties us specifically here in WA with the federal government and then obviously with the American empire. What we're trying to do is we're trying to go to our community and say, even at a state level, you've got to pick the parties that are against the AUKUS deal. Because what AUKUS does, it brings us closer as Australia, it brings us closer to the fold of Washington and obviously into the fold of Tel Aviv. So our view is if we resist the AUKUS deal, if we support the parties that resist the AUKUS deal, that is beneficial to our community. So as an example, the Greens are probably the number one party who are standing up against the AUKUS deal. Both Labour and Liberal support it. Likewise, there's a lot of independents across WA who are against the AUKUS deal. Find out for yourselves who those candidates are in your local electorate and vote for them. Put them as your number one preference.
So thank you, Brother Ahmed, for coming again today.
Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.